Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to the viewers of the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. I hope some people were not confused and thought that this was a replay. It said so in the content of the promotional. So we have an important topic for today. Greetings to Mildred Parks and Miriama Faye, Brother Ogawa. One, I want to encourage people, if they haven't subscribed to the show, to hit the subscriber button. And if you like the show, hit the like button and encourage your friends or anyone that you know, your associates, to watch the show. I want to acknowledge the passing of a very important person who contributed a great deal to the beauty of African people, African American culture, and who was herself an activist. The passing of Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, who was a singer in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and an organizer. And she was a singer in the Uhuru Singers, and then founded or co-founded Sweet Honey in the Rock, and a major follower of Sister Ella Baker. And Sweet Honey in the Rock, their music was absolutely and is absolutely beautiful. She retired from involvement in that group as a singer a number of years ago, and they keep on passing on their beauty. They're an a cappella choir with a real beautiful message. I got to see them in concert in 1984 and gave each of them a copy of my book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. So we know you were in the realm of the ancestors, Sister Reagan, and I know you keep on singing. You'll probably be up with the heavenly choirs. Probably James Cleveland and a whole bunch of others. You know what I mean? I also want to announce that next week's show will be a recording done the day before on the memorial to Dr. Nathan Hare, the founder of Black Studies, the first chair of Black Studies in the United States. I'll be speaking at that. Michael Eric Dyson will be delivering the memorial address, and a number of people who knew Dr. Nathan Hare, many of them were strikers. That is, they were involved in the San Francisco state strike. So I'm having that recorded, and we'll show that the entire program on next Saturday's show. So check that out. That's going to be a historic thing. Nathan Hare was a great person. Not too many people innovate and create something new. And in this case, with the involvement of the students, because he created the curriculum, the students went out and fought and created the first Department of Black Studies and College of Ethnic Studies in the country. And then they gave birth to a revolution around Black, and later we would call it African-centered studies or Africana studies. And again, a lot of us don't appreciate our power, but that was a significant achievement, and especially starting at San Francisco State, which I graduated from, later chaired the department there for 12 years, where there were hardly no Black students and no Black teachers. And so to create, number one, for the students to think that they could do that, indicated where power comes from. It's from your mind. And if you think you can run things, you can run things. I'll make comments on this when I do my eulogy for Dr. Nathan Hare. But that was a singular achievement. And it's still a strong thing, even though some have been cut out, many of them continue. And once you tenure people within a university setting, then they're in a permanent kind of position. And some of these departments are really doing great work. So this is the legacy of Dr. Nathan Hare and the students who produced Black Studies, as well as the Black Freedom and Black Power and Black Panther movements of the 60s. I see Jackie Johnson, Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025. That's a Republican think tank. Oh yeah, wait until I get to this. BS. But wait till I get to this. I don't make charges unless I can back them up. Yes, he does. He's just saying he doesn't. But I'm not getting off into that right now. That comes in my presentation. So listen carefully. In fact, listen to Trump on that. So the title for today is an extension of the first show that I did on Project 2025. The title for today is, quote, Project 2025, an outgrowth of American fascist organizations and traditions. And you've seen the promotional on this. And on the side of me is General Smedley Butler. And I've covered him in a previous show, but I'll be going into more depth into what that deals with. So the topic for today is Project 2025, an outgrowth of American fascist organizations and traditions. Now, before getting into the show, I want to play a piece of music that sets the tone for this show, because the motivation behind Project 2025 and the motivation behind fascism in general, you would say is racism. Yeah, that's a part of it. But it's greed. It's power. And I'll get into a definition of fascism when I get into this show. But this song by a beautiful songstress, pianist, and composer, Roberta Flack, really sets the tone for this whole topic. The song is compared to what?
I said I love the lie, lie the love, hanging on with push and shove. Possession is the motivation, hanging up the whole damn nation. Looks like we always end up in a rut, trying to make it real. But compared to what? Slaughterhouse is killing hogs. Twisted children are killing frogs. Poor dumb rednecks rolling logs. Tired old ladies are kissing dogs. And I hate that human love, that stinking mud, trying to make it real. But compared to what? Said the president, he's got his war. Folks don't know just what it's for. No one gives us rhyme or reason. If you have one doubt, they call it treason. I said we're chicken feathers, all without one gut. Trying to make it real, but compared to what? Go to church on Sunday, sleep and not trying to duck the wrath of God. Preachers filling us with pride, telling what he thinks is right. But he must be some kind of stupid nut. He tries to make it real, try to make it real, yeah. Try to make it real, real, real. Try to make it real, 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 yeah. Try to make it real, yeah. Real,
Sister Roberta Flack, a former school teacher, a philosopher of music. She says, possession is the motivation hanging up the whole darn nation. And you could say, wherever the vicious rule in the world, possession is a motivation. Along with racism, which comes out of it, slavery was possession, treating human beings like property. You hear me? Capitalism, its essence is possession, the possession of the very few, while the many can starve. The possession of science so that that science can be used to wage war on Mother Nature. Nothing wrong with science, but the philosophy of science in the hands of those whose possession is motivation, or whose idea is possession is their motivation. So possession is like what's hanging up this whole nation. And then she says, unreal values, crash distortions, unwed mothers, seek abortion. Of course, that's been knocked out. Huh? So when we're looking at Project 2025, we're going to see underneath it, possession is the motivation. And all these things, they'll say, woke agenda. You know, we're against woke agenda. How dumb can you get? Who is opposed to somebody having their eyes open? So apparently you should just say, you want a sleep agenda. Put people to sleep so they can snore while you continue to get rich and force the average person. Now in this country, I see young people all the time, but everybody else working 2 and 3 jobs, barely being able to pay their rent. You hear me? And many of them homeless and got a job, but can't afford to pay the rent. So unreal values, crash distortion. Unreal values that matter means more than life. That power is what you should worship. That some executive who doesn't even know up from down should, be given the authority to run the country. Where's the beef and where's my money? That's a real good one. Whether you're a beef eater or whether you are a vegetarian. You understand? The beef is a metaphor for saying, I need to get something out of this. Where's mine? All these unreal values, and possession being the motivation. Where's my possession? Now, of course, I believe there should be a different system. You know what I mean? A system where possession isn't the value at all. You know what I mean? But under this one, you should be able to get something other than some crumbs. As Malcolm said, if you're sitting at a table and everybody else is eating and all you got is crumbs, does that make you a diner? You're sitting in America, catching hell. Does this fully make you an American? Now, you should use whatever rights you have because I'm telling you, they're coming after them. So I thought this would be fitting. Of course, if you know me, I'm into beauty. I'm a strategist. That's next to God, loving the truth, the ultimate art and ultimate beauty. God don't need to be no strategist. God's got all the power and doesn't exercise it. Trump thinks that bullet just hit his ear because God saved him. Like hell, he just happened to turn his head. God ain't involved in this. We get free will. You're going to say God was behind the shooter? Some would. Are you going to say God is behind wrong? I mean, if God ain't behind wrong, the right we do is of our own choosing as well. And in Medu Neter, it says, I created, this is God speaking, according to Medu Neter, I created man and woman. But when they did wrong, now I'm paraphrasing, it's not an exact quote, I had nothing to do with it. It was their choice. And God didn't claim credit for right either. You hear me? That's your choice too. That's why you're here. to grow. So the topic for today, Project 2025, an outgrowth of American fascist organizations and traditions. And while Roberta Flack was basically singing in the context of the 60s, because some of the things she was talking about were issues being raised then, those issues affect us now. I want to say greetings to Kama Gazar and Jackie Johnson. Greetings. So this is real key. So a just society isn't hung up on possession, because everybody's got enough to enjoy the tree of life and can live in a right way. So I want to start with a working definition of fascism. And of course, you can come up with all kinds of definitions. It's just a bare bone one. And it's not mine, you know. It's a way of organizing society where a government is ruled by a dictator who controls the lives of the people, and in which the people are not allowed to disagree with the government. Now, some of you are going to say, well, then we got fascism, because you're allowed to have free speech here as long as not too many people hear if it's in opposition to the government. And then you can get attacked in all kinds of ways. So, yeah, there are some elements of that. And I should say on the side that if you look at the founding of this country, which this country is a settler colony, settler colonies by implication are genocidal, particularly those set up by whites. And that's because when they come in and take somebody else's country, they're not there to share. They're there to take everything. And so what they've generally done is wipe the native inhabitants out. That's what you're seeing in Israel right now. That's been a desire for a long time. And what you have is, looks like 99% of the people of Israel support it under the pretext of the attack, where 1,200 people of Israel were killed. But those kind of things happen to the Palestinians every day. And everybody, at least in this press, which doesn't want to say genocide or anything else, act like the Israelis are innocent. They're just citizens and they were attacked. No, they're colonizers. And their plot has been all along to take everything. And they're using that now. They've wiped out virtually all the housing, all the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, universities, mosques, but most importantly, people. 200,000 are under that rubble. This 38,000, which is a thing that is put forward by the group that had managed Gaza, Hamas, that's a false figure, and everybody knows it, because these attacks have occurred while people were in their housing, sleeping, and stuff like that. So you could say settler colonialism, well, is it fascism? Well, you could say it's worse than fascism when it moves to genocide. And it ain't too much different from fascism before that, because the people who you conquered, even before you wiped them out, they have no say-so in anything. And if they're left alive, their land is taken, and they're shut off on some land that doesn't produce anything, as are the Native Americans who are coming back now on reservations. So genocide certainly is about as bad as it gets, but we're here today to talk about fascism. So basically, this is a system where the system of rule is a dictatorship, and it's a control of the lives of the people under a dictatorship and everything else, and in which the people are not allowed to disagree with the government, take positions contrary to the government, and so forth and so on. And by the way, Trump said he'd be a dictator for one day. Trump's desire is to be a dictator, period. And we'll get into that one later on. So what I want to link 2025 to today, start off with the 30s and the 40s, because we live in the US of A, which Gore Vidal, America's historian for whites, and a good one, described USA as United States of amnesia. And so this country is full of amnesiacs. And blacks aren't too far behind when it comes to our history because of the erasure during slavery. But whites, you have a mythical history, no real understanding of the past. Yesterday is ancient for them. And a lot of you think that you can't win in a battle with them. If you have the long view and the short view, you've got an advantage. Because most of them, they've got a story view. America the beautiful, the home of the free and the land of the free and the home of the brave. Really? Where's the freedom? I mean, you're going to call exterminating Native Americans free? Yeah, if you're talking about your freedom to do it. Are you talking about slavery is freedom? So what are you saying? We ain't people? Or it didn't happen? Or you just don't want to be reminded of it because you didn't do it. I'm talking about the whites who say, I didn't do it, so I shouldn't pay for it. Well, you're living a better life because, it was done and you owe a debt. So, and that's another issue. So I want to put this in the context of what was going on in the 1930s and 1940s, because these two periods have a lot in common. And the forces that were financing fascism, as well as the fascist forces, because that was not a period in which fascism was in control, but you had fascist organizations, and you had very powerful people that enabled them to operate. In fact, they were often created by those whose motivation was possession. I see Gloria Briscoe. Hey, Gloria. Good to see you, lady. One sharp sister right there. And to reparations, and to Brother Lao Tzu. Greetings to all of you. So I want to compare Project 2025 with what was going on in this country in the 30s and then the early 40s, but mainly the 30s, so that we can look at the forces that were financing fascist organizations in the United States, the nature of these organizations. I'm only going to focus on a few. There were many more that I'm going to cover in this show, and tie them into the linkages with Project 2025. And what are the motivations for pursuing this project today? Now, there are some things different about today than the 30s. And this has to do with what is facing white people as a declining population, where they will soon be a minority in this country. This was not an issue in the 30s. And we're also dealing with the situation where the United States is in decline. China has already displaced it as an economic power and will displace it further on other levels. China today, Africa tomorrow, because the very signs that you saw for the rise of China, you see for Africa. It's going to be slower because we faced slavery and colonialism. Chinese faced semi-colonialism. And so you can recover a lot faster from that when your country hasn't been fully occupied and then flags put up and everything else. Lao Tzu says, no doubt this would be an excellent exploration on fascism. This would not be, it is. And there's a reason for it. Because if you're in denial on what's facing us, which is clearly fascism, when it locks down on your behind, it's going to be too late for you to go back and talk about, well, what could we do about it? There are some things we can do right now. And then the white savior, Biden and everything. That's not what this is about. So this is an important topic. And I spent a lot of time on this. And by the way, this is hard ass work I'm doing here. And it costs money. And I don't hardly ever get anybody making a contribution. Some of the people that make the biggest, statements don't put a dime into this. I'm not trying to make any money. It costs me. I pay a person. All these illustrations I'm going to be putting up here, my person, Cinnabar, does that for me. And then Loud Ogawa has been doing his stuff free. You could make a donation right here to this. It will help me offset costs because I'm going into 4 years on this, So I think this question of fascism is very important because I think you got to deal with the time, what it is going on right now. Don't wait until afterwards to talk about it. So it's important then to look at this period of the 30s and 40s because you had fascism rising up and you got it a full-blown movement today that is stronger than anything you had in the 30s under Trump. 77 million dedicated followers, and they ain't moving off of him. They stick to him like glue to a leather. And I've done an analysis on his strengths and why and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going into that. So in analyzing these forces, the fascist forces, it's for the purpose of looking at how can we be involved in defeating them. That's the point. There are 2 rules in war. 1, know your enemy. 2, know yourself. By self, I don't just mean person. It's important to know your own strengths and weaknesses, but I mean your people, the strengths and weaknesses of your people. And those are the 2 things that really determine how well you operate. And I just want to remind people that the reason Trump lost the last election, a lot of reasons, but Blacks played a key role in that. The Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor deaths, COVID, and the huge number of deaths that occurred under Trump's watch, that's the real thing. And the combination of those, but especially the smart organizing of a good organization that was out there then, Black Lives Matter, with their alliances and coalitions, put Trump out of the White House. And we're seeing how the Supreme Court is doing their best to keep him out of the jailhouse. So those of us who think we're weak, go right ahead and think probably you haven't done any fighting. But if you do those 2 things, know yourself and know your enemy, then you'll know rules for engagement, when you can engage, what you can do, and how you can win. So we specifically need to understand the historical period that we're living in right now and what kind of power we can exercise during this historical period and how we can deploy that power. And so that'll come up in this discussion. Now, the historical material I'm going to go into today is on U.S. fascist organizations and their financiers and international fascism in the 30s. The way in which those 2 forces, the international and the domestic fascist forces, interacted, because you have a similar thing going on right now. Gloria Briscoe makes the point, Biden put the first Black woman on the Supreme Court, the first Black federal judges of all presidents combined, the lowest Black unemployment, especially for Black men, last but not least, first Black VP. And she's following up on my point. She's giving me more points there. Darn right. And we overlook all of that. Why did he do that? Biden has never been a leftist, but we moved him off of center. And that's why the last group of people who are left now supporting him are coming from the radical wing of the congressional people, the squad, and Bernie Sanders. They're holding in there because A lot of those were concessions to them, but particularly to blacks who made the difference in the outcome of that election in Georgia and in other places. So yeah, and I think that he, given what he could do with the Supreme Court, he picked a good justice. He ain't gonna pick no radical. That ain't happening. But that woman isn't just smart. She stands up for the right side. She said, I really don't understand this man, Clarence Thomas. No, because she comes from a loving family and instilled in her was self-love. By the way, his grandfather instilled that in him, and I know he's embarrassed by this man, Clarence Thomas. I mean, his grandfather, really cared about him. So good points right there, Miss Briscoe. Along with the best package that a president has had since Lyndon Johnson on the infrastructure package, which, by the way, 2025 seeks to completely wipe out. Be clear about that. So I want to compare these two periods and then focus on Project 2025, some things I didn't cover before. And I want to focus it by starting on a little known meeting. I say, if you rely on the press and if you rely on the main publishing houses for your information, the chances are you're not going to know much because it's all screened. And if you're really going to get truth, it's going to be outside of the mass media. It's going to be outside of the major books that are approved by the major publishing houses. And that's where you're going to get your sources from. And then, of course, by being involved in movements and doing your homework and coming up with stuff, knowing stuff. So I'm going to start with a little known meeting held in Boston on November 23rd, 1937. It wasn't the size of the meeting. It was who attended this meeting on November 23rd, 1937 in Boston. 9 men were present. 2 of them came from Germany. They said they weren't officially representing Germany, but they were sent by Adolf Hitler. And 7 of them were among the most powerful industrialists, members of Congress, and leaders of political organizations in the United States. And they were all on the same page. And this is why they were at the meeting, because they thought Hitler was the best thing and Mussolini next to sliced bread. So at this time in the 1930s, the US was in the midst of a Great Depression, and President Roosevelt was implementing the New Deal. He wasn't doing it out of the kindness of his heart. It was to save the system, because there was a real possibility of a revolution taking part in this country. You had millions of people unemployed, hungry, with nothing. And the people who were meeting with the Nazis from Germany, who themselves were the major financiers of fascist organizations in this country, didn't want to see anything done and opposed everything that Roosevelt was doing. And in fact, at this time, the mass media highly praised Mussolini and Hitler. They said Mussolini made the trains run on time, and Hitler, he had an efficient country going on. So most of the mass media attacked anyone in this country who was against fascism. They attacked them, and they put that communist label on them, and they're doing that right now. You know what I mean? If you're putting forward anything progressive, you're woke, you're communist, they call it the left wing. What left wing? There ain't no left wing of any significance in this country. Left of what? But the point is that this was the state of the media then. It's pretty well the state of the media now. So they were complicit with the fascism in Germany for a number of reasons. One is because they liked what Hitler was doing. And I should point out that some of the forces that have now switched to Trump. Some of them Silicon Valley, some of them corporate forces, they're doing it for the same reason. They probably don't like Trump, but they see he's good for their pocketbook. They don't care about the Constitution because their Constitution is possession, which is their motivation. Now, what I'm going to quote about this meeting comes from a recording of this meeting. At that time, you didn't have tape recorders or DVDs or anything else. You had typewriters. And so the powerful who attended this meeting had this meeting typed, recorded, and they thought they had got the record because the typist gave them, the official manuscript. But they didn't know she kept a carbon copy. I used to use a typewriter. Some of you don't even know what that is. A carbon copy. It's a piece of paper that copies the original. And that carbon copy got copied and circulated all over the world and into what I got my hands on. So I always give sources here. I'm not just going off the top of my head, but I'm not a fact man in that I'm not just presenting facts. I'm creative. You know what I mean? Got new schools of thought and everything else. But if you're presenting the truth, then it should fall in line and conform to the facts. That's basically what a theory is in science. It conforms to facts. Theory in politics doesn't necessarily always do that unless you've tested it. So I'm quoting from a discussion held by these powerful people who attended this meeting. One of the Germans at this meeting, let me find my source here. One of the Germans at this meeting had some comments to make about why he was here, but particularly was making comparisons between Germany and the United States, because these officials from both countries had a common agreement. So the main thing that the German attendee at this meeting, main point he made was, and this is why the powerful officials from the United States were there, is that they liked certain things that was going on in Germany. And what were those things? It was basically, he said, quote, Germany has been grossly misrepresented before the American public by Jewish propaganda. See, here we go with that again. And we got blacks who are saying that. The Jews run the country. Really, if you don't own the army, you don't run the country. You show me the last time Jews had an army. That's some bull, Jews running the country. So he said, in order to clarify the picture, he said, it is necessary to recall that Germany of the Republican period has thrown a remarkable confusion into the minds of Germans. The state has been identified with some popular welfare institutions. Creative capital was overburdened by the effects of utopian social welfare legislation, burdened by unemployment insurance, sick leave, old age, death benefits, Social Security, and war pensions meant terrible handicaps. I should add, they didn't say this, but for the rich, you know what I mean? Trade unions and ours have lifted productive costs above world standards. In other words, when people are living well, we're not getting as much. So he's saying world standards might be behind. You're just not pocketing as much. So he goes on to say, what is the paramount achievement of National Socialism? The spirit of New Germany was conducive to a kind of national solidarity Exaggerated demands on social services were reduced and production costs drastically brought into harmony with the requirements of competition on the world markets, meaning they were breaking those institutions that could bring prosperity to the people. In 2025, is this on a massive scale? In case you're wondering why I'm comparing 1930 to 2024 and the project 2025. Not more, not less. It is true that many objections had to be overcome. The conception featuring the state as supreme welfare agency had to be eradicated and a policy of increased production pursued. In other words, there ain't going to be no benefits under this fascist Germany. So this is the key point. And he said they also had to silence class struggle and imprison dangerous utopians. Remember, fascism is the system where you don't have a say-so and you get locked up or killed if you go contrary to the government. So they had to imprison dangerous utopians and sentimental philanthropists. In other words, people who are helping the poor, just giving their money away, they're going to get thrown in prison. It is true that Jewish propaganda was able to capitalize on some stern measures and slander New Germany before the world opinion. This is undoubtedly detrimental, but we have gotten more by the rebirth of national solidarity and the cooperation of all for the same purpose. So then he has the nerve to go into the state of America. And because these rich, economically rich, politically powerful figures were in agreement, he could get away with this. So then he goes on to say, without wishing to arouse any semblance of interfering with domestic questions in the United States, well, of course, but he's going to go ahead and interfere. I cannot help mentioning that today's America presents a very close picture of social democratic Germany. In other words, the Germany before they had broke the institutions that provided well-being for the people, such as unions and other mass organizations. And he goes on, these are the problems that America has. Unrealistic welfare legislation. He's talking about the New Deal, sponsored by the administration. That's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Chaotic class struggles and wage demands absolutely out of proportion. Now, come on. These are people who had nothing to eat. They didn't have a roof over their head. We got a lot of them now, unemployed and homeless, but then on a massive scale. And then he goes on to blame the Jews. Strong Jewish influence in the political, cultural, and public life of the country are disquieting phenomena. We Germans, at any rate, are disquieted. Oh, it's such a shame that the issues of the poor are being addressed. We carry on a good work for world recovery, and we know what potential danger and increasing red influence in the United States would mean for the whole world. Red. In other words, you're a communist if you just care about improving the conditions of the people. Now, the key thing he says, and this is with the agreement, some of the most powerful industrialists who were in this meeting, he goes on to suggest how change can be brought about, which these powerful political and economic figures wholly agreed with. That's why they had the meeting with him. Quote, he said, the substance of the German suggestion amounts to changing the spirit of our nation as expressed by recent election. That is possible, but by no means easy. The people must become aware of the disastrous economic effects of the policies of the present administration. That's kind of like what they're saying about Biden, you know? Yeah, he got problems, all right. He got cognitive problems. It's pretty obvious. But what he's done, I mean, if you watch that Republican convention, it was a pure mashup on the truth. There wasn't a single fact hardly presented and no programs. And they're going to blame everything on inflation. when in fact, the inflation was caused by, since when can you just base it on $1 trillion infrastructure plan and $1,200,000,000 plan to save people during COVID, giving them all kinds of relief, when Trump gave $1 trillion tax cut and the defense budget is over $1 trillion every year. So if you want to talk about what's causing inflation, it's a bunch of them. But I say unemployment, hunger, poverty, homelessness is worse than inflation. Huh? Worse than inflation. So what he's suggesting here is that policies that are good for the people are disastrous. But for who? For those that want everything. In the wake of the reorientation of the public opinion, a vigorous drive must start in the press and radio. Technically, it remains a question to whether this drive may center around the Republican National Committee. So he's now telling them, you need to use propaganda to brainwash people to get them to think that the New Deal is a bad thing. Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt served more terms in office than any other president for one reason. That question that was asked by Roberta Flack, where is the beef and where is the honey? Where is the job and where is my money? He was putting something on the table. And that something led Black people to shift from voting Republican to Democratic, even though the Democratic Party in the South was fascist as you can get. They saw they could get something. See, when the masses make a move among Black people, it is always the right move. They may not know all the subtleties, but they know their basic interests and they move as a group. And if you don't want to, you can be on the outside of that. And it's when the masses move that things change. So this thing that I'm talking about, fascism in the 30s, this is what the essence of this was, that it was a move by corporate interests to support, and I'll get into this one in a minute, fascist organizations to break the New Deal. And basically 2025 is an extension of moves being made by big business, starting with Ronald Reagan, where he broke the unions, and both through the Heritage Foundation and the Hoover Institute, Project 1980, they laid out his agenda because this boy didn't know up from down. He couldn't chew bubble gum, talk, and think at the same time. They had to script him on everything. And when he went off script, he was really off. And one time it was good. He got into a meeting with Gorbachev by himself, and his staff knew this boy was a cipher. He didn't know what was happening, but a good thing came out of that meeting. There was an agreement to disarm. Well, they quickly rolled that back. They said, Ronnie, don't you know what you're doing? I studied Ronald Reagan. I'm not going to go into that right now. But the key point is that the think tanks, and in particular, Project 2025, which is the best well-oiled piece of proposals that have come out from the right wing in history. And it's got days on it. What Trump should do day one, executive orders he should sign, blah, blah, blah. You hear me? So this is really the basis for fascism. And the Supreme Court decision that the New York Times reported on, this is July 2nd, where it reports on the January 6th case and basically rules that former Donald Trump is entitled to substantial immunity from prosecution on charges of trying to overturn the last election, as long as he is operating within presidential authority. What is that? This is a propaganda decision. This is a decision of the right wing. And it's saying Trump can go as far as he wants. You hear me? So this is tied in to what I'm talking about that happens in the 30s, because these people on the Supreme Court, They don't care about nobody's freedom. They basically stripped the voting rights legislation of its enforcement provisions, which is the provisions that required states that denied blacks the right to vote and the ability to vote to be free to do whatever they want. And so there's been a whole lot of removal of blacks from the voting rolls since then, and taking a woman's right to choose, taking it away from you. You want to talk about dictatorship. And by the way, this is unconstitutional because the Constitution did not give the Supreme Court power over any other branch. They took it. They took it. And these suckers have been too weak to take it back. So, we're seeing this come from many different levels, not just Project 2025. So, the key thing about the American representatives in this meeting is that they shared the German view. Two of the people in the meeting were representing General Motors and DuPont. General Motors and DuPont. Do you hear me? William Knudsen, president of General Motors, in a press release after coming back from a vacation, made this comment about Germany. He said that Germany was the miracle of the 20th century. So does that suggest that he would support an American Hitler? Hell yes. You know what I mean? And I'm citing sources. So you want to sue me, you got to understand, you got to sue the source. This ain't coming from me. I'm just quoting the source. So when I get to Project 2025, you will see that the motivation behind those backing these proposals is pretty much the same as the German and American industrialists, and in the case of the Germans, political representatives, who opposed welfare legislation, workers fighting for better living conditions through unions, demands for higher wages, Social Security benefits, unemployment, sick and old age, and death benefits, and war pensions, and a lot more that have to do with now, like the environment and a lot of other things, because that's not what they were addressing then. So I'm only going to get briefly into who the main financiers of U.S. fascism in the 30s was. There were many more, but I'm just going to talk about two of them and key organization that they financed, in fact, two. And the two key financiers of these organizations was at that time General Motors and the DuPont interests. And the group that they created that was the leading group pushing fascism was NAM, was an organization, NAM, National Association, NAM. And it was organized in 1895 as a powerful anti-labor group. That was mainly their thing, to prevent unions from emerging or any independent organizations that could empower people and give them a better life. There was a Garrett committee in Congress, and I'm quoting them. They described NAM, quote, as a secretive, reprehensible organization in the way they defeat congressmen who refuse, this sounds like, again, fascism, to obey them. The La Follette Committee. Now, most of you probably don't know this. La Follette is one of the most progressive congressmen in the history of this country and tried to build democracy in the areas in which he had power in Oregon, and was a major force that the powers of this country went up against to break. This was a good man right here. I study American history, by the way. Some of us just study Africa. You need to study the world. If you're going to have some power, you better understand how power is working all over the world. And you better study more than just blacks. You better understand power relationships, period. So The La Follette Committee criticized and condemned this organization, NAM, for using poison gas against workers. Machine guns. You hear me? Machine guns. See, this is an age where they just took off the gloves and went after people. They got more sophisticated later. Machine guns, man. You know what I mean? This organization used spies. They didn't just use crooks, they used murderers. Because if they wanted to take out some union organizer or someone else that's progressive, they kill them. Huh? Now they become more respectable now because they learned that, they were getting criticized for being brutal. So, they go other routes like using propaganda and money to buy off congressmen. You know what I mean? But NAM is still a major force, major economic force today. So while January 6, 2021 was an attempted electoral coup that the Supreme Court is writing off, how far they write it off remains to be seen, but it looks like they're writing it off and they're giving Trump a chance to get into the White House so he can also just write it off legally. So January 6, 2021 was an attempted electoral coup designed to overturn an election that Trump lost. It was over 6 million more votes on Biden's side than Trump's. And by the way, the Democrats will get more popular votes than the Republicans because there's more black, brown, red, and yellow people, and then a third of whites who will be on that side. Then there are people on Trump's side. Trump right now has mobilized his base. That's really the secret of Trump. Here's the rule on this. It's a third rule, how power works in this country. With white people, it's a third. 1/3 will be for something. 1/3 will be against, and 1/3 will be neutral. That's how whites work. You only know that if you've been in battles. You can get it in a book, but you better understand it. And so some of our scholars will say, we're alone. You're only alone if you're not smart enough when you need allies to have them. You only get allies. I quote my books, Our Leadership, Volume 1 and 2. The rules on alliances only do them when you have to. Go on your own and win the battles you can on your own. But when you can't, you'll lie or coalesce. Coalition is a short-term arrangement. Alliance is long-term. But you're in charge. The only way you enter an alliance is you got to run it or you got to play a significant role in it. You know what I mean? Those are rules. And so when we're looking at the issues that are occurring right now, that's going to be key in terms of keeping the right wing out of the White House and stopping fascism. So while the January 6, 2021 was an attempted electoral coup designed to overthrow Trump's defeat, put him in the White House, even though he had lost, and admitted to some of his own advisors that he lost. In 1934, leading members of the American Legion, which is another group that corporate America created, it was again a union-busting group. It's supposed to be a patriotic organization, but it's basically a union-busting group controlled by big business. And so in 1934, leading members of the American Legion conspired with Wall Street brokers and other big businessmen to overthrow the government of the United States and establish a fascist regime. And this occurs when General Smedley Butler, this guy on the left here, 3-star Marine Corps general, 2-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, somebody who occupied Haiti and restored slavery in Haiti, occupied at least some real estate in China during the Boxer Rebellion. And as he would later say, served as a gangster for Wall Street. He would later say, I was a bigger gangster than Al Capone. Al Capone just ran a city or two. He said, I ran continents. So they approached him to lead an army of 500,000 soldiers and civilians who had been ex-military or whatever, to move on Washington to overthrow the government. That's a fact. How many of you even knew about this before? I mean, you're wondering, where am I going with this 1930? There was an attempt to actually put fascist force in power, take Roosevelt out. Because among other things, they didn't like the tax that Roosevelt had imposed on them. A huge tax where over a certain level of profits, 90% of their profits went to finance programs for the people. You know? So what happens then is, and I pointed this out before for some people that watch this show, but I'm putting more meat behind this, what led to this. What happens is then Smedley Butler, blows the alarm, goes to Congress and tells them about this plot. And what ends up happening is a newspaper like the New York Times gives them cover and says, no, this didn't happen. But as Julius Archer, in his 1973 book entitled The Plot to Seize the White House, clearly shows, and other documents as well show, there was such a plot. It was presented to Congress. Congress agreed that the plot occurred. It was documented, but they did nothing about it except shut it down. Why? Because the people that own the country were plotting this. Now, you think this is irrelevant? You think we shouldn't focus on this? Because something similar is beginning to happen right now. And Donald Trump is trying to lie his way out of it and say he got nothing to do with Project 2025, done by the Heritage Foundation. And this is a 920-page report calling for the major reorganization of the federal government, with an emphasis on creating a strong executive or president who will bring every executive agency under control. And one of the ways they're doing it in their proposal is taking out anyone with knowledge that can protect some interests, like knowledge of the environment, knowledge about drugs, knowledge about anything that can benefit the people. Now, Trump is hiding this behind his statement that he's going after the deep state. This has fooled some people on the left. You've got some people on the left falling for this, the deep state. And so he's suggesting that all these agencies are oppressing you. But it's interesting that the one agency that is most oppressive is the one that's going to get the big bucks and is not going to be touched. And that's the military-industrial complex. That is the big agency. Not much is spent on anything else. The only way the government is made to look like it's supporting the issues of poor people is they include Social Security cost under it. And that's a false flag because the government's not paying for that. You're paying for that out of your check. And the media and everything else goes along with it and acts like it's an entitlement. It's like it's something the government is giving to you. That's a setup for them to take it away. And I'll get back into that one in a minute. Remember, one of the concerns of the right, German and American, that were meeting was Social Security. I mean, they didn't have any before. They had just come up with it. The Germans had destroyed theirs. In America, they have a saying that in America, you live to work. And in Europe, you work to live. Because they got medical care. They actually have some real vacations, lengthy ones, They have a lot of social programs. My wife tells me that in the UK, if a person is unemployed, the government takes care of your mortgage payment till you get a job. And if you come out of prison, they got a house for you and they're going to find you a job. You know, this misery we live under in America. And by the way, where did they get this from? Roosevelt's New Deal. The only difference is they added a few things to it, like healthcare, you know, but that's where it came from. And right now, this war in Ukraine, it's going to tax the budgets of a lot of countries like Sweden and Finland that had been scared into joining NATO, which was a foolish move on their part. Russia's not going to invade you. And America could have stopped them from invading Ukraine if they had allowed the president of Ukraine to sign on. And instead, this administration sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine, telling them that if they signed an agreement, you know, with the Russians, Europe and America would turn their backs on them. And now look at what Ukraine is, a basket case. You think America is going to rebuild it? Huh. They ain't rebuilt no inner cities, and they haven't rebuilt anything they've damaged in Iraq or Afghanistan. You know what I mean? These people are plunderers. So when we look at Project 2025, we have to understand that Trump is tied to it, like a horse is tied to a buggy. You know what I mean? I'm going to show you, if you didn't already know, and I think some of you already know it. Reparations says white people are not for Project 2025. It's not out of love. It's out of security purposes. Let's not get it twisted, people. Project 2025 is a thing. The right wing, Trump's base, but they don't really know what's in it. But Trump has been pretty much selling this on the campaign trail, and they see Trump as their white savior. And they're being corralled into a lot of stuff out of fear of immigrants and everything else, because they see the demographics of this country shifting. So they're saying to themselves, many of them, well, if he saves us from the horde, then it's okay. They're going to find out later what that means. And I'm going to go into this in just a minute. So Trump is distancing himself from Project 2025. He's saying he doesn't know anything about it. Now, remember, Trump is not the most honest person on the planet. So, I mean, if you're going on what Trump said, then come on. You know what I mean? Come on. That ain't too smart. Because he says one thing today and one thing to tomorrow. Neither one of them is true. So Trump says he knows nothing about Project 2025. So I believe in putting forward the facts. Let's see what Trump said about that.
Let's take a look. About 140 people or so involved in this Project 2025. They are former Trump administration officials. But you've seen Trump recently trying to distance himself from the Heritage Foundation and its policy blueprint. I'm going to play some newly discovered video of Trump from 2022, which appears to repudiate his claim that he, quote, knows nothing about Project 2025 and who's behind it. Take a listen.
Heritage does such an incredible job, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America. And that's coming. That's coming.
Well. He's not only saying that he knows about Project 2025, he is saying it's giving them a mandate, because this boy is too dumb to tie his own shoes. You hear me? In fact, he was able to be president. Notice, anytime somebody's sitting in the White House and doesn't age, they come out after 4 years and didn't age, and he didn't age. That's an age-producing machine. That's one of Biden's problems, that coming in old as he was, and then being engaged in the presidency. Hell, that's just aged him tremendously. Look at Obama. Look how much he aged. He looked like an old man. Because if you're seriously taking care of business, then you are responding to all kinds of pressures. And stress is defined as those problems outside of your control. And Trump, the only time he was faced with a stressful thing, but because he doesn't care about people, it didn't stress him, was COVID, because it could no longer work. The presidency could no longer work on automatic pilot, because the way the presidency works is that basically, if you don't want to do anything, then the administrators will run things and things will go okay. But when one leading commentator, it was actually a historian, made the comment, Trump will be okay as long as he doesn't face a crisis, and that was COVID. And when COVID happened, well, sorry. 40% of the world's deaths on COVID occurred in the United States. 40% of those deaths occurred to Black people. I know we got some people that don't want to deal with COVID. It didn't happen. Trump was the one that politicized the whole COVID thing and the vaccines and everything. And Trump was the first one to take a vaccine. And then when he caught it again, he got everything pumped into him that he could get pumped into him. You hear me? And came out okay. So this whole thing, it didn't happen and all the rest of this stuff, yeah, give me a break. So this is Trump saying that he's supportive of what the Heritage Foundation is doing. And by the way, the Heritage Foundation has been providing agendas for, Republican administration since Reagan. But they're not the only ones, but they are now the main ones. And I should point out, the Heritage Foundation played a major role in appointing mid-level executives in the Trump administration, because he came in without a cabinet picked or anything else, because his son-in-law had convinced him to reject Christie's recommendations for top-level positions. So literally, Mercer, who's a multimillionaire and a primary supporter of Trump and a former supporter of Steve Bannon, hired him. She played a major role interfacing with the Heritage Foundation and the Trump administration, filling slots in his administration. And the people filled, they didn't have to be qualified. All they needed to do was trash that department that they were in. So to suggest that Trump has no involvement right now, well, his own words contradict it, but we can go further than that. I'm looking at a New York Times article, July 12, 2024, that's doing some linkages between Trump, his administration, and Project 2025. So the commentator from MSNBC made the comment that a whole bunch of Trump people in Trump administration have actually written Project 2025. So one of them is a man named Russell T. Voigt, Vought. He was Trump's former budget director. He led the section of Project 2025 that deals with executive orders. So this is real important, because they got a whole bunch of them written for Trump to sign. He is the policy director for the Republican National Convention. And the National Party is controlled by Trump allies. So he's playing a major role. That was his budget director. So that means the money man. And the money man, he's the one that really can get into programming. So when they're doing executive orders and stuff, well, they're going to be very, very precise and very targeted. Now, 1 part of 2025 is a plan by the Heritage Foundation to gut the civil service. In the last show I did on this, I showed that they plan to eliminate the civil service, basically, and to put Trump appointees who are volunteers in those positions. Now, number one, these are career appointees who have expertise in certain areas. And a heavy percentage of them are Black, by the way, and people of color. In place of those, you're going to have Trumpites in there doing Trump's bidding, not necessarily expert on the areas in which they are covering. So that's Project 2025. But then let's talk about Trump. Going to this New York Times article, let me quote here. But Trump has made no secret about his plans to gut civil service protections, conduct the largest mass deportation efforts in history. This is his whole stuff, which the Republican convention focused almost exclusively on two issues: inflation and immigration. And charged immigrants with being criminals and everything else. And he even had the nerve to associate them with Hannibal Lecter, the man who ate people in the movies. You understand? And saying they were all criminals, rapists, and everything else. And claiming that what's happening under Biden is the worst ever. And there ain't too much difference between what happened under Trump and what happened under Biden when it comes to the immigrants coming into this country. And then making an appeal to Blacks and Browns, and he's got a nerve to try and make it to Browns at all, that these immigrants are taking your jobs. Really? Since when are Blacks out there picking berries, vegetables, and stuff like that? That was sharecropping, and that was slavery. We don't do that anymore. And how many of us are working in the meat factories where during COVID, the Mexicans and the Latinos who worked there were being forced to work under these conditions and dying like flies? You know what I mean? So, this was part of his myth. His allies had developed a legal rationale to erase the Justice Department's independence. Well, Trump has said this over and over again. He wants a head of the Justice Department that does his bidding. That's what he tried to do when he was trying to fake the election votes for president. Several advisors are now vetting lawyers who will fulfill the job to play the role in the Justice Department of doing what Trump tells them to do. Some of this, though, not all of it, can be found in Trump campaign's own public policy platform called Agenda 47. It is more sparse than Project 2025. He did that so that he could leave a lot of embarrassing stuff out, like abortion and things like that. So Trump barely mentions Agenda 47, but it's in there. He directly Trump supports abortion in that he put the 3 Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court that gave them overwhelming majority to do it in. But now he doesn't want to talk about it. So some media is trying to say he changed his position. Like hell if he has. In addition, Trump has said over and over again that there's bureaucratic bloat and what you need is to cut it down. What's interesting here is when you look at the agencies, and I'm going to go into Project 2025 in a minute, that he wants to cut a bloat, those are all the ones that protect you in some kind of way and put a hurt on some industries, even though not as much hurt as they should, but more than they will be able to do when Trump is able to take control over the environment or any kind of environmental policies that will be positive out. Mr. Trump has made no secret of his plans to hold the largest mass deportation in history. He's talking about breaking up families and everything else. And by the way, in case you think they're all Mexicans, there's a lot of blacks from the Caribbean here that will be hit that way too. Project 2025 also, and Trump has said so, share equal demands to end diversity and equity. That is us, you know what I mean? Meaning affirmative action, anything that gets you a job when you couldn't get it before, or promotion, or something else. On international policy, Trump Project 2025 both emphasizes a protectionist outlook called America First policies, as well as higher tariffs. And the question of tariffs, what both Biden and Trump have pursued, they cut two ways. So if you're doing, and this is largely being aimed at China, China can do the same thing on you. You know what I mean? Gloria Briscoe says Agenda 47 is a light form of Project 2025. Yeah, true. It's a summary. So Trump has a thing on federal jobs, which I mentioned a minute ago. And Trump wants to issue an executive order to fire career civil servants. When his last days in office, Trump issued an executive order F. An executive order F did that, talking about firing civil servants, but Biden rescinded it. But he plans to do it when he gets into office. So these are some of the things. So he's tied to Project 2025 like a glue is to a letter. Like he's tied to lying. You know what I mean? If you want to predict that he's not going to tell the truth, then it's as consistent as his ties to Project 2025. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I didn't cover before on Project 2025 and then conclude with some things that you can do. And I'm sure some people here have some ideas, maybe some even better than mine. When you deal with Project 2025, and I want to thank Brother Ugawa for sending me the full document. I asked him for it, and he sent it to me. And I do not pretend to have read the whole thing, but I've gone through the key agenda areas that are particularly applicable to us, and then I'm reading others later on. So the first thing is Project 2025 starts off by saying that the Constitution vests executive power in the presidency, not the departments and agencies of the executive department. Well, does that mean that you're not supposed to have any agencies in the government because the Constitution didn't, set it up? And because there may have not been a need for them then, or because the slave masters and the rich that founded this country didn't have an interest in it then. So, I mean, what does that mean? Yeah, so the executive or the president is head, of the executive branch of government. But this Constitution was not set up so that he'd be dictating to every branch of government, because actually these founding fathers, slave masters though they were intelligent. And they knew you need to have some skilled people running stuff, not just going off the top of their head. So according to the Heritage document, the federal bureaucracy, according to them, and this is a major justification for them breaking up and destroying the civil service, for example, and the heads of many departments who are qualified and replacing them with a different type. They are asserting, which is not necessarily true, that the bureaucracy carries out its own plans, whether the president approves of it or not. And this is a key thing. This is real funny, but it really isn't because it's serious. They're pursuing a woke agenda, W-O-K-E. What does that mean? It means that there are some things that could benefit people. That's woke. You're supposed to be cold-blooded and cut the people's throat because possession is the motivation that hangs up the entire nation. So the introduction to Project 2025 attacks Congress delegations and executive agencies that protect expert expertise. In other words, we should just dumb things down. You hear me? And let somebody run an agency that doesn't know up from down. Let's like going in for an operation. Let's just have anybody who can pick up a scalpel and operate on you. That's what they're saying. You know what I mean? This makes about as much sense as nonsense. They also say that agencies are too big and powerful. See, this is the whole story that Reagan came in on. The problem is big government. Yeah, what that really was a disguise for was neoliberalism, taking those things in the government that could benefit the people, either knock them out like low-income housing, cut it in half, and then Clinton eliminated, or generally privatize as much of government services as you possibly could under Friedman's direction. And this is part of what Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation is also moving in, because they actually say in one part that they want to use the Friedman model. So this idea that big government is the problem, they're oppressing you. No, the problem is the government is not delivering enough to you out of your tax dollars, because all of it's going to the defense agency, to the national security state. So you're not seeing anything. And for an agency that's supposed to be protecting you, they shouldn't call it a Defense Department, call it a War Department. They haven't had anything to defend against ever. You could say World War II, but this is a key point to make about World War II. Hitler modeled National Socialism and Nazism off the American model. Mein Kampf, he says so. And so you're seeing the complicity of big businessmen with fascism. What I didn't point out is that in the buildup of the German economy, major American industrialists played a big role in that buildup, to such an extent that on the eve of World War II, the United States was short in aluminum because they had used the aluminum to build up the Air Force of the Germans, which was a very advanced Air Force. You understand? So the involvement of big business in this was a profit. They didn't care whether they were financing the United States and their war effort when the war started, or Germany. And you had slowdowns. You had factories in the US where big business was not producing the arms that they should until they got the right payoff from the federal government. You understand? All of this kind of stuff was going on. Yet this is supposed to be a land of freedom. And the World War II was, a war. It was a good war, Well, it was one fascist, at least some in this country fighting against another one, the one that was modeled after it. And as soon as the war is over, they're rearming the Germans and treating the Russians who saved them as the enemy. And then people fall for it because every part of this country, the media, both parties, fall in line. We got people building bomb shelters in their house, afraid the Russians are going to drop bombs on them. They lost 27 million people. There were no threat to anybody. And that's, you got Russia as the bad man right now, based on that. You hear me? And I'm not a defender of Russia. I don't like Putin. So don't get me wrong. I'm just not into the propaganda. It's pure bull, So they're attacking expertise under bloatedness. You got too many experts. Since when can you have too many experts? they also say these agencies are too big and powerful and are weaponized against the public. The only one that's really weaponized against the public is the Defense Department, which needs to be cut down to almost nothing and put that money into social programs, into medical care. So they're using this as an argument for restructuring the federal government. America is very good at making the victim look like the criminal look like the victim. That's Malcolm's statement. And so they will come preaching freedom when they're practicing slavery, preaching democracy when they're practicing fascism or authoritarianism. So this is what they say overall. So you get the intent of this. They call for boldness, and I'm quoting them, quote, to break the bureaucratic back, bend it, and I'm adding bend it, to the president's will. So the key objective is to make the president in charge of everything, a dictatorship over all of these agencies. Comey Kazar, homelessness really starts under Reagan and is continued under Clinton, but they're breaking the policies of Lyndon Johnson and Delano Roosevelt. So let's get that straight. And let's also get something else straight. Real estate interests in your local communities are also playing a role in this. Federal government has pulled out of low-income housing. And then what's happened in cities, the real estate interests in cities took the position that keeping hotels that could provide room at a low cost for people who could afford to pay little, or building low-income housing, that shouldn't happen because it's not profitable for them. So most cities, I live in Oakland, and the homelessness rate has gone up to the extent that you're saying homes that Blacks could live in, they either can't afford it, the mortgage or the rent, or the low-income housing isn't being built, and in place of them are condos, each of which is selling for $800,000, $1 million or more, all over the place. So it's not a problem of housing, it's a problem of no low-income housing. To change that, you're going to have to get federal legislation that puts it back on the books, that huge amounts of money go into states and cities for low-income housing, and then empowering local community groups and others that in a city. Some churches do this, but you need massive funding for that. So here are some of the proposals that they come up with. One is the Council of the Environment. I'll come across this a couple of times. We are now facing global warming, the pollution of the planet. This Mother Earth will not be livable through the 20th century unless you're controlling the fossil fuels and others that are heating the environment, poisoning the environment. And not enough is being done. Biden's plan at least was an attempt to deal with that. It wasn't enough, but it was better than what's happened before. But the key point is, these folks at Project 2025, they're about seeing that any restraints on the environment are ended. And Trump, by the way, has been consistent in his own willingness to support this. He offered the oil billionaires, if they gave him $1 billion for his campaign, then he would lift all regulations on oil. And oil is a polluter. And that's why there's an attempt to go to electric vehicles, which China now dominates on the world market. You know what I mean? So under the Council of Environment, this is the council that coordinates environmental policy for the federal government. The key point being made on this section, but there are other sections that deal with this in greater detail, is that it should frame new regulations that limit the scope of judicial review. In other words, let the corporations pollute the environment, reduce any kind of supervision of them to a minimum. And since blacks and brown people and poor people live in the polluted areas, let us catch cancer. But since all of us eventually are not going to be able to stand the heat, have you felt the heat that has been coming on? Each year now is the hottest year ever. The rising of waters, there are going to be cities flooded, period, gone. All those lying on, the coast there. Huh? And so what's the federal government supposed to do? Nothing. So again, they're looking out for the interests of the American people. They say this is a project for freedom, a project for eliminating bloated government. Okay? So what do they propose? Eliminate the existing Office of Domestic Climate Policy. In other words, blindside this so that you're not keeping records on hot weather and how you can stop it, polluting environments, the melting of ice caps, or anything else. Another proposal coming from Project 2025. That the president issue an executive order creating, quote, a senior advisor to policy development to implement relevant environmental policies. In other words, put someone in there that doesn't know what's going on as long as they please Trump, because he's going to pick them. And since he's hip tied to corporations who pollute and do everything else, then, put in a presidential appointee. So a lot of this empowering the president to be a dictator is really empowering the president to end any kind of agency protection of the environment or people, of their health, water, or anything else. Listen to this. Project 2025 proposes that the president issue an executive order eliminating the interagency working group that deals with the social cost of carbon. So what they're doing is they're hitting each area that could protect you on the environment. Carbon is the major polluter. So what you want to do is, according to this proposal, eliminate that. The fentanyl crisis. Now you see, nothing shows up on this when it's hitting us, when the drugs are hitting us. You know what I mean? You just throw them in jail. And then just recently they tried to equalize the powder and crack cocaine and stuff like this. But fentanyl is killing a lot of white people. Now, why is it killing them? That's the real question. Because people are in such despair in this country, living on the ground, literally, having nothing, that they're going to drugs. And some of the big corporations that are producing these drugs are being allowed to, even though it's killing people, right? Because they're too big to fail. That means they're big enough to buy off everybody. And so what this is proposing under the Heritage Foundation is that instead of having a career expert that's running the fentanyl crisis, the drug crisis, put in a Trump appointee. Someone that doesn't know what the holy hell is happening. Now, do you think white people know this? No, they don't know it. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're dealing with drugs, you need somebody who knows something about drugs, Under gender policy, he wants to eliminate the this agency wants to eliminate Executive Order 14020, designed to eliminate support for abortion. Of course, they want to erase anything that's got to do with abortion. Now, in going after the career civil service, this is extremely serious. They go back and deal with how it was created in 1883 and then carried further under the New Deal. And they are all out to wipe out the New Deal, whatever's left of it. And so they want to eliminate merit as a basis for this bureaucracy. And they put this under, see, this has been a popular statement of Trump, draining the swamp. That's like going into a hospital and taking the medicine out. You'd call that draining the swamp? You know what I mean? Huh? So the Heritage Foundation proposes that, so that's that, going after public sector employees. They also propose, now they raise this as a question, but you should know what this means, whether public sector unions are appropriate, meaning they plan to wipe out public sector unions so that the people that Trump appoints that heads up different agencies of the federal government won't be paid anything. I know they're going to feel real good about that. They've already done in private sector unions. 10, 12% of the jobs people have in this country now are unionized, almost nothing. So they want to go after the public sector as well. You know, they actually get retirement benefits and stuff. When you eliminate the civil service, those are all gone, you know. According to the Heritage Foundation, they say, I'm going to quote them, there is a bipartisan consensus in the mid-20th century that holds that unions are not compatible with the Constitution. Did you hear this? With the Constitution. Yeah, of course, there was no mention of unions in the Constitution, just like there was no mention of political parties because they didn't have either one. But you're going to say it's going against the Constitution? Well, it's your reading. If you got this Supreme Court and they get a chance to rule on it, they might. Look at how they've been ruling on everything else. But what makes a higher income, which still isn't enough, unconstitutional? Maybe we should say that executive pay options that are way above that of workers, that's unconstitutional. Anybody going to say that? There'd at least be a reason for saying that, but the Constitution didn't mention this. Now, under the Department of Education, this is another thing. They propose to eliminate Head Start. You know that? One of my friends, former friends at least, former chair of the Black United Front in Portland, Oregon, Ron Herndon, who put together, that is, the pressure through a 85% effective school boycott, the pressure that led to the creation of the African American baseline essays under the leadership of Dr. Asa Hilliard and John Henry Clark and other scholars laid it out. And that led to an Afrocentric educational renaissance in the 80s and 90s. Ron Herndon was also head of Head Start. Head Start is one of the few programs that federal government has put out on education that has benefited young people. But the Heritage Foundation creates this myth that most of the students in Head Start have been sexually abused and stuff. Where's the data for this? So this is a major thing that they want to do, but they want to eliminate the Department of Education. How dumb can you get? The problem with the Department of Education is it puts very little money into education. Most of the money in education, as you all know, comes from your tax dollars on property taxes. And since blacks own less property and it's worth less, less money is going to go into public schools where blacks are, when in fact, your property taxes should not be used to fund education. The federal government should fund it. But since the military industrial complex is getting all the money, then the hell with it. How are you going to maintain any power in this country and you haven't got a educated group of people? And most of the schools are run down in black communities and brown communities and a lot of white communities. Now, some aren't, particularly for the rich, because their tax dollars, it's enough to sustain public schools. Some of them in rich areas look like universities, Eliminate the Department of Education. The Republicans have been calling for this for a long time. I guess they want to create a Department of Miseducation, which is what they basically have right now. When they talk about the Department of Energy, which is their major concern, they talk about they want energy dominance and scientific dominance. Now, they're eliminating the Department of Education, so how are they going to have any scientific dominance? And so they claim what they want to do is create more jobs for people. What this whole section is about is protecting the fossil fuel industry, the oil industry. That's what they want to do more than anything else. Gloria Briscoe says, don't forget Trump's executive order was to get rid of low-income housing loans. That's a good point. Yeah, a very good point. So what they want to do is protect the industries that are polluting the environment and weaken substantially the executive units that police the environment so that these fossil fuel industries can go mad. And this is basically the sum of these proposals. So they have created a false energy crisis. They said America's in an energy crisis. America's right now self-sufficient in oil because they have gone into digging deep into the ground, fracking, which is really no good. But they have created this false energy crisis to justify giving the oil and gas companies unlimited power. But if they continue to do that, you're not going to be able to live on this planet. They don't care about that. They claim that their major concern is to make America competitive against China. Well, if you're going to be competitive against China, then what you need to do is start producing on a massive scale electric cars, solar energy, wind energy. That needs to be where your investment is. And that will produce a lot of jobs. Why isn't it there? Because the people who are paying the Heritage Foundation, the oil and gas industry, they don't want it there. So the real objection of the Heritage Foundation and their right-wing allies is Biden's energy and environmental program. And as they say, his program of putting government money into the environment. And they object to the effort to end fossil fuels. So this is, they have a series of things for Trump to sign immediately to end every program that Biden has set up in this area, the most ambitious on the environment and on infrastructure investments that would lead to jobs. And they want to repeal that, the infrastructure investment, and they want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, Now, they beat Biden up all over the Republican convention for inflation, but they don't want it regulated, you know what I mean, in any kind of way. So they're against any subsidies for renewable energy, that will do it in a way that doesn't pollute the environment, Heritage writes that they're uneasy about the way the government is going. And what they want is private sector energy innovation, which means attack the environment as much as you can, make as much profit as you can. So they say you must stop the war on oil and natural gas, so this place can be unlivable. According to Heritage, there should be an economic regulator, not a climate regulator. And since regulation means let them do whatever they want to do, there ain't going to be any regulation or nothing. Now, this is one that you could just see the hearts of these right wingers just beating real fast. Increase the nuclear arsenal. Oh, let's put us in a position where we can blow more of the planet up, when in fact, nuclear weapons, for anyone that's serious and got any brains, it means that you're creating something that you shouldn't use. Now, they used it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they're capable of using it again. But the fact of the matter is, if you do, that's death and destruction, that's what they call it. MAD is for mutually assured destruction. That's what that policy is. So they want to develop new nuclear warheads. They want to develop plutonium pits where you can put plutonium in. What good's it putting plutonium in pits? They can take thousands of years before they lose their potency. Enlarge the Navy by building new nuclear reactors. Yeah, and nuclear reactors, when they go off like they did in Japan, poison the water and everything else. Briscoe, are you referring to the rainforest and the Amazon as well? Yeah, they want to destroy that. Health and human services. Now, what the right wing likes to do is make everything cultural, so they want to make it look like they are defending families, so they want to restore two-parent families, and they want the man, because white men particularly are being done in by deindustrialization and other policies, which they don't admit to be the cause. So what do they do with the status of two-parent households, which among whites is 50%? It used to be 75%. They blame Biden for weakening of the families. Really, he's only been in 4 years now. The family's been weakened for a long time. When good-paying jobs left the country, they weakened Black families first, and then white families following. And so you're not going to deal with the cause. You're going to deal with pointing the finger at your opposition. And then they're going to bring in the LGBT issues and mix them in here to make it look like this is weakening families when people had their own sexual choices. So they claim to be supporting two-parent households, but they haven't got a single proposal for doing anything to strengthen families. Comic Kazar, Department of Indoctrination, disguised as education since its inception. They have never been interested in educating the oppressed. True. So these are just some of them. But essentially what this is about, in a time in which whites are a minority, in which this country is in decline as a global power, in which Europe itself has fallen as a power, They want to resurrect the elite to give them control to, increase their wealth and their power. They don't have any real programs here for improving the well-being of the mass of the people, white, black, brown, red, or yellow. This is really a program to further weaken America, and at the expense of the poor, of the working class. There's hardly any middle class left. So right now, you're seeing the Democrats in disarray. It appears that Biden is going to be forced out, and they're going to go to some model to try and pick someone that can replace him. And right now, Trump has got the edge. The truth is, as I pointed out before, the Democrats will get the majority of popular votes. But unless they can get a majority in swing states, that's where you can lose. States like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia. And those shifted for the Democrats. And one of the reasons Biden's probably going to be dumped, aside from some cognitive issues, is that they're fearful that he can't win these back. And in the case of Michigan, the issue around Gaza is key, because the Arabs are tanked on this thing for good reason. They're not going to support him unless the Democratic Party puts forward somebody who is anti these moves. Won't support them either, probably. So we're faced with that. But the key point here is, when it comes to Trump, Trump's strength is his weakness. Trump's strength is that he has a huge white base of support. He brought in 7 million more in the last election. That's his weakness, because right now you're seeing Trump at his maximum in terms of his potential to get support. That's his maximum. He is trying this fracturing strategy of getting a few black votes, a few more percentage-wise, a few more Latino votes after insulting them to death and laying out policies where he says he's going to deport a lot of them. So that is designed so that he just gets enough to inch in, along with voter suppression that's been going on for quite a while. How do you beat him? You simply have to mobilize a base that's larger than his, and it's got to be particularly overwhelming in the swing states. Obama, his strategy was to always get the majority, and that's out to get, because the majority of the Democratic Party base has not been mobilized yet. And so when you get that base mobilized, then that's what can make the difference. In the case of the Republicans, they are pursuing some very smart strategies. And one of them is a strategy of Bannon's, which is precinct strategy. And he's been doing this on his talk show. He's in prison right now for 4 months. And what that is having people work the precincts, and on election day to control it in terms of intimidating people to vote. But prior to that, organizing at the precinct level. For us, block by block organization, we're the only movement, the San Francisco Black Freedom and Black Power movement, that organized block by block. The Panthers were advised to do this. And when James Foreman came back from Guinea, he recommended the 10-10 system, which was the block system of Guinea. Until you organize people at the mass level, you don't really have organization. Because when you have a group, they can identify your group and knock it off. But when you have it spread among the people, it's a whole nother story. We did that. 45,000 Black folks organized block by block. We're the only organization in the country that did it. And that's what we need now, not just for this election, but generally for community organizing, not just around precincts, but around neighborhoods so that people run them, not a party. This is not for the Democrats. This is for the organizations that we build. But essentially, if you want to knock out 2025, you better knock Trump out of the ballot box, meaning you better beat him. Because if he comes in, then what you're going to see is more of that. Daniel Price can't really do much mobilizing when he's going to use the military to quell unrest. Bull! See, you need to get your butt into some kind of organization and organize. Was he able, when he was president, to stop us organizing before? No. And this is the best way to fight that. If he tries it again, y'all get paralyzed through this paralysis of analysis. I'm giving you some facts so you can use them. And some of you, like Gloria Briscoe, is probably better informed on this than me. But the fact of the matter is, that's almighty whitey syndrome. They can do this. Yeah, well, what can you do? What can you do? You got power, baby. Use it. The first power is to free your mind, to free your behind. But the other is get into some organization that will empower us as a people. Get involved in it at the local level. If you got some kind of national organization you want to get into that's doing good for Black people, and if you don't, build one of your own. So I hope you got something out of this. Project 2025 is like Custer's last stand. This is white people's last stand. They are pulling out every measure, the Supreme Court and strengthening the president. That's designed to strengthen reactionary white people. You know what I mean? Every move that's being made, weaken our vote, anything else. Reduce the number of Latinos in this country. Well, that's like trying to stop the tide of the ocean, because in less than 15 years, a majority in this country is going to be Black, brown, red, and yellow. And the question is what you do about it. But if you have a plantation mentality that you can do nothing, you will sit on your behind and get run over. But if you have a mentality that you can empower yourself and your people through organizing, through using your strategic power. Malcolm reached this conclusion. We set the example, and we had already concluded this. He said, and I'm going to quote him from the last message, he used to think that the strongest revolution was in Africa, but he had come to realize that it was the African on the inside of the house, talking about the Africans in the Caribbean, inside of Europe, Britain, and France, some of them here, but the African inside the United States. He said he had come to conclude that those on the inside of the house were the most powerful ones because they were in the strategic position they could upset the furniture. We had already concluded that because our movements had created the chain reactions that Malcolm realized we were creating. San Francisco Freedom Movement. We created the chain reaction that got students from UC Berkeley to launch a free speech movement after we got them arrested for a year. San Francisco State go back and created an experimental college. The Black Panther Party, by organizing in the Black Panther Party, they inspire the Latinos to organize the Brown Berets. They encourage the Puerto Ricans to organize. And they inspire AIM, the American Indian Movement. That's your power. But if you don't understand it, you be talking about, oh, mighty whitey can do this and do that. And remember this. What percentage of the military is made up of Blacks and people of color? And how reliable is a military going to be when it starts turning its military on the people who are under arms? That's why the Joint Chiefs, under the head of the Joint Chiefs, under Trump, had to issue an apology to former Joint Chiefs for going out and supporting Trump, being present when Trump was doing some symbolic stuff when Black Lives Matter was demonstrating. because they feared this would create a split in the military ranks. You know what power is, baby? You're in the strategic position to wield a whole lot. Gloria Briscoe ran down some of the things that Biden did because of us and of other progressive forces. I'm running down some stuff that we've historically done. We're one of the few groups in the world that when we move, we don't just move other folks, we move the world. We create chain reactions in the world. That's your power. So you think you have none? You got the culture of popular choice, and culture drives liberation movements. That's what they're an expression of. So it's a question of whether you use the best of it. And right now, it's a question of whether you're going to help put Trump in the White House by either not doing enough or not voting or whatever you do. And by the way, I'm not an electoral politics person. I'm not into any party. I'm just into power, just power, strategic power. And so you got a choice. You're going to roll up your sleeves and do something and give Trump a choice of the White House or the doghouse or the jailhouse or whatever, or you're just going to wring your hands and talk about something else other than the topic right now. Right now, this is a turning point election. I'm not saying it because Democrats have been saying it. I'm saying it because fascism is around the corner. And don't forget how Hitler got in. He got elected. And then what he did is he clamped down. And some of these corporations that thought they could control him, he was in control of them. That's a big mistake. Big mistake. So I hope you got something out of this. Hotep. Let's go to some comments people are making. Reparations, talking about going on strike for 3 days to get reparations. Fine, but you better address this right now. Because you're not getting reparations on a 3-day strike. You're not going to have one. And only the powerful get reparations. You know, Jews only got it because the Germans lost World War II. America could impose its power on Germany. So they got some reparations. You know what I mean? And even if you get reparations, that's not freedom. Money is not the path to freedom, baby. The Jews had enough in Germany that they should have been fine. When they rounded them up and stuck them in concentration camps, they're pulling the gold out of their teeth before they, gassed them. I'm not against reparations. We need it, but that's your long-range objective, and you need some objectives right now. And one of them is defeating Trump. Question here. How many all averted people revolution? How many all averted revolutionary party? And I am doing something for African people because it's time for us to get free. The house is burning, and it's a hard job to make sure of it. The All African People's Revolutionary Party doing good work. And that's one of the groups you can join, Kamazar, he's recommending something written by G.T. Goddard, Underground History of Education of America. Yeah, read that. I hope people will address what I've just laid out and not go off on some other issue. Deal with this. Kamazar, Gloria Briscoe, weapon, way BC. It is a process that forms the earth. One time, all the land masses were connected as one. Humans are the newest life forms in the neighborhood. I don't know what this is. Okay. Leon Phillips, most of us won't vote after these Project 2025 suggestions are implemented. We won't have to worry about voting anymore. Well, yeah, the majority of people, this country is set up to discourage people not to vote, so that the few can just run everything. Leon Phillips is talking about the fall of America and we'll be in it. Well, it depends. It depends on how it falls. Depends on what you mean by fall. Gloria Briscoe, Trump said the next RNC will be held in Venezuela. The Confederates did flee to Brazil. Yeah, Commissar is making the point that the priorities in this country is not education. That's true. The media, everything else, and the schools are designed for miseducation. So that's a question of what we do about it. Taking over the schools. I did a show last week, a repeat on the most successful model for taking control of public schools done in Kansas City over 20 years. Hardly nobody watched it. Now, it was the second time I put it on. That was a part of an African-centered educational movement that I led. I had a world Afrocentric educational plan in the 80s and 90s, and it included organizing rites of passage, study groups, independent Black schools, Saturday schools, and taking over public schools. And the project that you saw in Kansas City was one of a number that we had run on the public schools. It was the most successful. And most didn't get it. I'm putting out a model. They had one person on the Board of Education for over 20 years. They were in charge of that part of the school budget that educated those kids, had their own campus, their own teachers who trained them. Asa Hilliard, Wade Nobles, Leonard Jeffries, James Smalls, and others. I mean, one person on the board who was conscious knew how to form alliances and coalitions and to do that. So what could happen if you have a majority on the board and they're conscious and know how to maneuver? Huh? What could happen? People didn't get it. Also gave you the best Saturday school or after school program in the United States and probably in the world, the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center. I don't know if they covered that because it was a shorter coverage, 2 hours. Probably got part of it last week, but if you go back to the original one, you'll see the whole thing. Leon Dixon, he's laid out a book on how to do this. The Future in Our Hands. W.B. Du Bois Learning Center, a school that's operated now for over 50 years. Hundreds of kids every year, giving them high-powered education, scoring well above what the school system is doing in the state, but raising the consciousness of their students. One of the teachers is a former student of mine. I've had her on the show a couple of times, Kuji Chagalia, who's a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. She went and taught in that school system for 3 or 4 years. You understand? And people talking about this ain't it. Yeah, you don't know what power is. Multiply that and you'd be running your own schools in your own cities. And that means controlling a huge budget, you know. Daniel Price, the popular vote mattering is an illusion to make Americans think they have freedom of choice. Donald lost the popular vote in 2016, but the Electoral College put him in anyway. Look up Schedule F. Yeah, true. And so the question is, what do you do in those swing states? The problem is the structure of the country around the electoral college. That's the problem. And so it's structured to favor these small white communities. And so that's what you've got to win. Biden got in because he won those the last time with black help in certain areas. Commissar, I hope you don't draw the conclusion, therefore it's a bright thing to eliminate the Department of Education. No, it would be a bright thing to cut the budget for the Defense Department down to next to nothing and put it into low-income housing, put it into education, come up with a program for financing education publicly out of the federal budget. That's what it's supposed to be for, you know? And then we have to fight to see that we get the right content in that education. Ogawa asked if I read, or any of us read, the Global Trends report for 2040. No, I haven't. I'll check it out. Reparation makes the point that Zuckerberg is supporting Trump. Yeah, good point. Shouldn't have your accounts on Facebook. Ron has a cite of a good book, The Anglo-American Establishment, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time book by Carol Quigley. People should read that. Oh, Lao Tzu's going to a wedding ceremony. He says, my wedding ceremony, if you're getting married, congratulations, brother. Lao Tzu, which is worse? End of humanity through nuclear war, the path of Biden, or Project 2025 implementation by Trump, who lacks leadership skills? I think we need our own agenda. You have your own agenda. You're not responding to them, you know? And that means for now and the future. Jamal Davis is calling for an independent party. Yeah, but if you do that, you're going to have to do block organizing. If you just create another organization that calls itself a party, then it's going to be a name only. You're going to have a real base for that. But yeah, depending on your objectives. Jackie Johnson, Project 2025 defunds hundreds of thousands of education jobs. Neocons and neoliberals would like to be working. Commissar, does it matter which party is in office? You got to look at more than this old Tweedledee, Tweedledum argument. There are times where something serious is happening. And when that is the case, even though both parties may not be that different, when you're getting to a point where the agenda is verging on or is pushing you into fascism, then you just can't talk that old talk. You got to deal with what's happening right now, you know. A lot of talk here about reparations. God was asking about demographics and explain how 2025 connects to the demographic change taking place in the U.S. over the next 20 years. Well, number one, Project 2025 is trying to reduce the number of people of color in this country. And so that's going to reduce the numbers of brown people and black people in the country. So that's a clear, direct way, and it's one of the hottest issues in the election. So, and the way the demographics are going is, you know, it's only a matter of time before whites will be outnumbered. So that's it. Generally, the overall policies of Project 2025 are policies that if people had a chance to vote on and knew what they exactly were, would probably vote down. So that is a way of imposing the view of very few that run the country on everybody, and especially on people of color. People of color are going to suffer the most in cutting off the environmental regulations that protect you from pollution and stuff, because we're living in the most polluted areas. And then, like, ending a program like Head Start especially benefits Black, brown students of color, but others as well. But that's also one program that, you know, kids lose. In this case, kids of color, though it's not just for them. When speaking to Black folks about fascism, said we relate it to the Jim Crow era. Yeah, but you should relate it to what's going on right now and explain how this infringes on what's happening right now, because under the strict Jim Crow level, you couldn't vote. So some of us can vote. They're trying to restrict it, but a lot of us can vote. So you can vote. So how do you call this fascism when you can still vote, right? And so you've got to be able to explain that. How is it that a chief executive can just order just about anything they want to do? Doesn't matter how you vote in that case. Supreme Court decision is suggesting that if he ordered your assassination, if it's within his executive duties, he could be free from any charges against you. And of course, we know this government has done that before. But if that's embedded in the principles of the government itself, well, then that's a whole different story. So you can give an example of what it used to be, but you need to do right now. And so take the implications of Project 2025 and apply it to right now, to people's lives right now. Sabukwe, AARP agrees fascism is around the corner and we need power. Yeah, to protect ourselves from it. You have power. You need to organize it. As Kwame Ture said, organize, organize, organize. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. I think we just about wrapped up here. Gloria Briscoe, that's why I like having you come in on this. Trump's name appears more than 312 times in the project. Yeah, because it's written for him. You think they're going to write it if they thought that Biden or someone else is going to become president again? Reparations, talking about the burning of Black Wall Street and our rights for reparations. James Moten, I want my daddy's records. I want my reparations. Indemnity is relevant for every other demographic than the African descendants of the slave trade. Yeah, I agree. Of course, there's some Mexicans who could say they want some reparations for a good part of this country taken from them, you know. And Native Americans definitely for genocide, but yeah, no question about it. But at the same time, we got to be dealing with building power to empower our people overall. And in this particular case, to dump this initiative. Okay, that's it. I hope you got something out of that. Hotep. Don't forget, next Saturday, we'll be playing the memorial for Dr. Nathan Hare. They will be recorded the day before. Hotep.